This is footage coming in from the border between Belarus and Poland. And what we can see over here is these are the migrants who are on the Belarusian side trying to cross over into Poland. Now, as you can see, you've got some Polish soldiers right over there, essentially standing in their way. These migrants are trying to get into the European Union via Poland. Of course, Belarus is not in the European Union, and Poland is. Now, the situation or the conditions at that border are very, very difficult. It's freezing cold. We're approaching the winter here in Europe, and humanitarian agencies, relief agencies, have not been allowed access to the migrants. In fact, those that have been, it's been few and far between. It's not nearly enough. So I'm in the DW News Brussels studio, and what we're witnessing happening at the border between Poland and Belarus is essentially the latest flare-up when it comes to the migration crisis here in Europe. Of course, that particular border post is the latest flashpoint, if you will. But really, Europe has been battling migration since 2015, when well over 1 billion people entered the bloc. Most of them were coming in from Syria and other countries in the Middle East. Now, my colleagues in the Bureau have been covering the migration story, not just this particular angle, but other flashpoints as well. And I'm going to be talking to them to just understand what exactly is going on in this particular situation at the border between Poland and Belarus. But more importantly, what is Europe going to do about migration? All right, so we are at the Europe building in Brussels, and it's a very important morning because the foreign ministers of the European Union are meeting, and I'm going to be talking to our bureau chief now. She's going to tell us a little bit about what's happening here today. Hi, Alex, it's good to see you.
Hi, Chris.
A very early morning for us here. Okay, so tell us what's happening here today.
So we're waiting for the foreign ministers to arrive here at the Europe building, and they are going to talk about possible sanctions against Belarus. The problem here is that the European Union has accused Belarus of encouraging migrants to come to its territory and then pushing them, thousands of them, to cross into Poland and other neighboring nations. And that is, of course, a huge problem for the European Union. And that is what they want to talk about here.
Okay, so we have seen that footage of these migrants, and we've seen all the language and the rhetoric. I mean, they're calling it hybrid warfare on the European Union. Just tell us what kind of a meeting, what kind of atmosphere you anticipate in this meeting.
So I think that everyone is really concerned because this crisis, this humanitarian crisis at the EU's external borders has been going on like for weeks now. And you just spoke about the images, desperate people. They cannot go back and forth. They are just stuck there. So the problem is that, as it seems, the European Union cannot do anything about it. They are talking to countries of origin where the people are coming from. They have started to talk to, the Belarusian regime, but they just have to come up with something to solve the situation.
And what questions do you have coming into this morning? For perhaps which minister would you be talking to?
Well, I'll try to talk to all of them. Of course, the German foreign minister, right? Because I'm just wondering, okay, if they are going to decide on more sanctions against Belarus, is it going to make any difference on the ground? And of course, the very important question for us is the European Union living up to its values, credibility? Are they going to help those people stuck there?
Okay, interesting times. Okay, thanks so much for that, Alex. We'll let you go, get back to your spot. She's actually got to stay there because if she loses the spot, that's it for us in terms of getting access to some of those ministers. So this is it, the press scurry. We are waiting for those foreign ministers to arrive. If you've seen press briefings from here, you'll recognize the environment. They're sort of going to walk along the red carpet and make their way over here. This meeting is scheduled for a few hours. It's basically going to take the entire day. But I am going to go and talk to my colleagues who are actually on the ground in Poland. Jack is out there. He's been there. He's done some reporting for us. Have a look at some of the stuff that he's done while I make my way back to the office, which is not very far away from here.
Hello, sir. My name is Jack Parrick. I'm a journalist with Deutsche Welle. This is the exclusion zone. We cannot come in. We're not allowed. We've got to drive back that way. Do you know how long this exclusion zone is going to remain in place? How long the exclusion zone will remain? No? Just stay here. Okay, we go. Okay.
Okay, so Jack, can you see me? How's it going? Tell us where you are.
Hi, Christine. So we are in the border town of Mikhailovo. It's just outside of the exclusion zone, which means that it's one of the centres where aid workers are sort of getting clothes and food to try and get into the exclusion zone to help the people that are going through. It's also, interestingly, the place where when border guards have picked up the refugees and migrants that have got out of the exclusion zone on this side, if they encounter the border guards, they get taken to a site here to be processed and often, we understand, sent back to the Belarusian side.
Okay, so Jack, perhaps just tell us a bit about who the migrants are.
Well, most of them are from the Middle East, from countries like Iraq, Iran. There have been some people from Syria that we've encountered as well. There are some people as well from sub-Saharan Africa as well, but mostly it has been that sort of center of the Middle East, those war-torn countries.
How are they actually getting to Belarus?
Well, this is the big question. The European Union managed to stop direct flights from Baghdad to Minsk a fair few weeks ago now. But the question is whether there are other flights that are going in through perhaps Istanbul, also Moscow, we understand. That's the accusation, at least from the European Union side. And that is actually something that's being looked at, how to stop that. The issue of not just trying to stop people from getting across the border, but actually to prevent people from being told that this route through Belarus is an option for them to enter the European Union. That's something that the EU has been keen to try and do, Christine.
Okay, we've been hearing from officials here in the European Union that this is effectively being orchestrated in Minsk, that the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, has something to do with this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, exactly. Before, sort of in the summer, President Lukashenko, the man that calls himself the president of Belarus, said that he was prepared to send migrants and drugs across the border. And ever since then, we have seen these increased numbers of people coming across. Essentially, the EU accuses him of instrumentalizing and fabricating this crisis in reaction to EU sanctions. That there's been 4 rounds, perhaps 5 as well, of rounds of sanctions against the Belarusian economy, all the way up to Alexander Lukashenko himself. He's personally sanctioned. And so the EU says that he's doing this in response to that.
Okay, Jack, we're going to let you go out there and get on with your reporting. Keep warm, keep safe, and we'll catch up with you later.
Great talking, Christine.
So this map's pretty handy because it's essentially showing us, like right here in pink is Poland, Belarus here in blue, and essentially the action is all taking place along this borderline right here. But you can see Lithuania, Latvia also share a border with Belarus, and these countries have expressed the fact that they feel that tensions could escalate here, that this could essentially break out into some form of a military conflict. They've called on NATO to intervene. So what would that look like? What would a NATO intervention look like? And would NATO intervene? And for that, we're going to go to my colleague Terry, because she covers NATO, all things NATO for us in the Bureau. She's been speaking to some diplomats, officers at NATO, and we're going to get a sense of, would NATO intervene? And if NATO did intervene, what could that intervention look like? So to Terry we go. We're just here in the studio where Terry is actually just taking a small break to be able to talk to us. Terry, what is the likelihood that NATO could get involved in this situation unfolding at the border between Poland and Belarus?
Well, Christine, Poland in particular has raised the possibility that it would ask NATO for what's called Article 4 consultations. Now, this is pretty important because it's one step below Article 5, where all allies would be called into military defense, which has only happened once in NATO's history. But Article 4 is when any ally feels a threat to its security. And so Poland is signaling to NATO that the situation at the border may be getting tense enough that it's worried about its own security, not just worried about the border, not just worried about those people at the border, but worried that its own security is threatened. It hasn't done it yet, but it's saying, it may be getting there unless you, NATO, help us out more with soft power so it doesn't escalate further.
Okay, so you've already hinted at soft power, but what does that help look like from NATO?
Yeah, because most people think of NATO being a military alliance as, well, we'll send in the tanks. Sending in the tanks wouldn't do anything in this case to stop the people from coming to the border, right? So in this case, NATO's soft power, and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is a civilian leader, not a military leader, means in Poland's view, and I've heard this from Polish diplomats, calling up countries of origin, for example, calling up Iraq, where many people are coming from, calling up Qatar, which is serving as a hub for many of these flights, because NATO works with these countries, and saying, you guys need to help stop the flights. That's what NATO can do. Stop the people from getting there, which is, in this case, the same thing as it's asked the European Union to do, and as the EU has had some success in doing.
Max, I remembered we were having a conversation not too long ago about your time in Greece. Just tell us about...
That's right.
Some of the things that you experienced there, some of the things that stuck out for you when you were reporting. When was that again? You went to?
That was March 2020.
Right.
So pretty much 1.5 years ago. Yeah. A similar situation to what we're witnessing now, like the Belarusian Polish border. So I mean, basically, all started when Turkish president pretty much was telling migrants and refugees in the country that they could leave for the European Union, that Turkey would no longer prevent them from exiting the country. And the consequence, a lot of people got on to self-organized transport or transport organized by the Turkish government and went to the border. And a lot of them gathered in this at the Greek-Turkish land border, close to the Greek town of Kastanyas. That's where we found ourselves in March 2020 back then. And it was a bit difficult once we got there to really grasp what was actually going on there, because similar to now, there is a military exclusion zone between Greece and Turkey. It's heavily militarized, so you need special permission to be able to go to the fence. So the Greek authorities would grant us journalists permission or escort us to the border fence whenever they deemed it was secure, safe, and probably also good for us to show them. So we could go there like once or twice a day.
And then there was this one press conference, right, that you talked about where the European chief, basically the EU's chief, Ursula von der Leyen, comes out and she gives this press conference. Just tell us about that.
I remember Ursula von der Leyen saying, she was pretty much saying that Greek borders are also European borders. And she was thanking the Prime Minister, or thanking Greece, for being their aspida. Aspida, Greek, meaning their shield. So perhaps the shield against foreign aggression by the Turkish president, perhaps shield against people trying to come in. You can probably have it either way.
From what you witnessed at the border between Greece and Turkey, what we're seeing now at the border between Poland and Belarus, is this effectively Europe closing up to the rest of the world, building fences along borders and keeping migrants out?
I mean, it depends, right? I mean, those are two situations that are very similar in one aspect, but then also very different in terms of, the players and how the situation is playing out. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens regarding the situation in Poland. But as to what happened in the last 1.5 years, ever since we went to Greece, and saw that situation playing out back in March, not much has happened ever since. Greece further continued to strengthen its borders. More Frontex personnel was sent. So all what European nations could agree on pretty much in the meantime in terms of migration and asylum was that fences and deterrence is the key. And they also resorted to, in many instances, to illegal methods, illegal pushbacks. So we haven't seen much progress in terms of finding a sustainable solution in the EU when it comes to migration and asylum. That's for sure.
I mean, look, we've got skate parking right happening.
Funny though, skaters right here, politicians in there.
It's pretty impressive out here. So Marcelo and I are both new in the bureau, and all of this is impressive. Brussels is actually quite a really cool city. Tell us a little bit about why, from your experience, right? Why more and more Europeans are anti the idea of migrants coming into their countries.
Yeah. So I think migration overall has been a big issue for several European countries over the course of time. Like we have Germany in the 60s and 50s with loads of migrant workers coming in. And even back then it was never the plan to integrate them in the community here. It was always, well, you stay for 2 years and then you leave. And I feel like it was similar to many other countries. Many see in refugees Muslims, and there's a big anti-Muslim racism problem in the EU and Europeans overall. And I think they kind of just project issues in their lives on the refugees. So for instance, they see in them a big tax problem, and they feel like their lives is going to get worse because they would have to pay for those refugees, which in reality is not true. But still, this is something that keeps, it's a repetitive kind of image that's kind of there, and they always speak about it. It's a big cost for them. But then there's also this issue where they would fear that through these migrants coming in, those refugees coming in, there's some sort of ghetto going to be built in Europe, and that those migrants don't want to assimilate, they don't want to be European in their morals and ways of living, and they don't want to integrate. Now, I've talked to many, especially in Germany, and this is not true. There are actually many migrants, but also on the other side, many Germans who are fearful of, this influx of migrants coming in. And especially the migrants that I've talked to, they want to come here to work. They want to be students here. They want to be part of our society. So I think this notion of them being a problem is more so a conservative or even far-right sentiment that many people have.
Just trying to check out some of the tweets that came out of the meeting today with the EU foreign ministers. But all good, because we're going to get an update from Alex, who I think is ready for us now. Here we come, Alex.
Hi.
Hey.
How are you?
Cool. So we're going to make this quick because I know you've had a long day. We met this morning, and this was before the EU foreign ministers had met. As we said this morning, they were going to discuss further sanctions on Belarus. Can you just tell us what unfolded? What was the outcome of their meeting today?
So they have agreed to widen the criteria on which you can base new sanctions. So now the European Union is able to target anyone who is involved in smuggling migrants to the Polish border, anyone who is supporting the Lukashenko regime, organizing the transport of people to the border. And we are still waiting for the list of concrete names, can be officials, travel agencies, airlines, but it's going to take a couple of weeks maybe to finalize the list.
Okay, so we're still expecting the list, but from where you sit, do you think that this is going in the right direction, that this will have the outcome that the European foreign ministers hope that it will have, that it will pressure Lukashenko's government to stop sending migrants into the European Union?
Well, that's of course we have to see, but I don't think that there is any alternative, because they cannot give in and say, okay, we are taking back now some of the sanctions and we would like to continue the dialogue and to restart the dialogue with the Belarusian regime, because that would mean that, they are at risk of losing credibility here and maybe also of betraying those people who are still in Belarus fighting for more freedom there. And that was the reason in the first place to sanction the regime there.
Okay, so Alex, as I mentioned to the viewers, this is just the latest flashpoint really in this migration crisis, if you want to call it that Europe's been experiencing over the last few years. And my question is, more and more people are going to be coming to the European Union seeking asylum, seeking refuge, because we're seeing it. There's a lot more conflict happening in parts of the world, like in Africa, for example, more people being displaced because of climate change. It looks like the European Union is struggling in terms of what it's going to do with more migration to come. What is your sense of what is the answer to migration from a European perspective going forward?
And your analysis is excellent, we have to say, because Lukashenko is now to be blamed for the current crisis. But the problem is that the European Union doesn't have a common migration policy that would address all the new challenges. So its system migration policies is dysfunctional. And that is, of course, what makes it so ripe for exploitation by authoritarian rulers. So, and Europe's approach, like talking about more border fences and militarizing of the border, it's what they are doing right now instead of thinking how they can agree on a common migration policy, how they can enable people to use legal ways to come to Europe to work or study here. So those challenges are here to stay. And the problem is if the European Union won't be able, all the member states won't be able to agree to reform their migration policy, we are going to be facing those problems over and over again.
Right. And okay, so this is really my final question, because you've basically put it out there, right? This is a Europe fortifying, closing itself off, talking about all the fences that are being built. Where do you think the leadership's going to come from here? Because we have issues where you've got some of the states who receive the migrants, these are the external border states, who say they don't get help from other EU members. Just how do you see it? Is this dividing the bloc? Or perhaps is there more unity along the lines of let's close off Europe and help people in the countries that they're in? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think that at the moment it's dividing the bloc, and I'm not very optimistic that any member state, any leaders are capable of taking over the leadership in this and showing leadership. So unfortunately, I mean, I hope that the European Union will find a solution here, but at the moment, I don't see anyone who would be capable of showing leadership here. However, maybe, now Eastern Europe is being confronted with this crisis at the border with Belarus. So maybe there will be sort of understanding that all the member states need each other to be able to address the coming migration challenges.
Yeah, because many more migrants are set to be coming to the European Union. And I think a lot of people understand that now. So we're going to get out of your way. Thanks so much for that, Alex.
Thank you.
And hopefully, we can bring this to some kind of a conclusion at some point. But I'm just going to let some of what she said sink in, and I'll come back with my final thoughts. So it's clear that the European Union's answer to the situation unfolding at the border between Belarus and Poland is more sanctions. More sanctions on Belarus, the idea being to put pressure on the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, enough pressure for him to stop sending migrants over into the European Union. But the answer for migration overall, right? Because as we highlighted, this is just one or the latest spat in the migration saga. I think the answer that Europe is giving to migration overall is indeed fences, hard borders, particularly at the continent's external borders. That is Europe saying to the world, we don't want more people coming in here. A number of member states, Lithuania comes to mind, are erecting fences as we speak. Lithuania, as I said, is building a 700-kilometer fence along its border with Belarus. It has the support of a number of member states. Some have even gone on to suggest that the construction of these fences, of these borders, should be paid for by the European Union. But then that brings us to the question about what Europe's responsibilities are, what Europe's moral obligations are in a world where many more people are being displaced for a number of factors. People are looking for refuge, and Europe can provide that refuge. Is Europe allowed to simply close its borders and say we don't want people? Is Europe allowed to effectively deny people the prospect of applying for asylum? as we see happening in the case at the border between Belarus and Poland. I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this subject. Let's engage in the comments section below. Let's keep it respectful. We're trying to have a conversation, because I think many questions remain unanswered here in terms of just what the feelings are. Are you European? Do you feel justified in what you're witnessing happening at the border between Poland and Belarus? Do you think that it is time for Europe to shut the doors to people who are desperate, who need help? Or perhaps do you think otherwise? And how should Europe? What should Europe do? We heard my colleagues point out that there isn't a single answer in terms of what do we do about migration. Member states are divided. What should Europe do if it isn't closing the borders?